This morning, I sent a text to both of my boys who are in college, and I said, "Hey guys, the days are getting shorter. We are coming up on flu season. I highly recommend that you guys go to your health services center and get a flu shot, and also start taking some vitamin D just for immunity and for all the variety of reasons that vitamin D is so good for us." I also, in that text, included a link to each of their individual university health services site, specifically how to get a flu shot. So it has the schedule an appointment, it has the phone numbers, and I basically just put everything out in front of them. It was probably a bit overkill. However, one of them got a horrible case of the flu last year. As his mom, I can say it's the sickest he has ever been. And the other one, it's flu season and I don't want my kids getting sick for a variety of reasons. Then the follow-up question to that is, will they actually get a flu shot? The answer, I have no idea. I don't know. Part of me, I could say, oh, yes, they definitely will. I could say, oh, no, they won't. So I have really no idea. What does that have to do with today's topic on fasting? I am wanting to provide to you the information I have been learning about intermittent fasting, particularly on women. And I am wanting to just pass this along to you. I know a lot of women who have chosen to fast, and I used to be one of those women as well before I learned actually all that I'm going to be sharing today. The more I have learned, the more I just want to let you know. And so I am passing this information along to you about the physiological effects of fasting and withholding food, and just treat it like my text to my boys. You may want to do something with this, you may not, but I can't not tell you. The more I have learned, I'm like, this is really interesting information. What you're going to get today is the physiological research-backed information. I'm going to get into the definition of fasting for purposes of this conversation. I'm going to tell you the source that I'm using, the different types of fasting, the health claims that fasting purportedly offers, where the research even originated, and then the effects on men versus women. Then we'll get into how we can achieve some of the health benefits without fasting. First things first, I just want to give you a heads up that you will hear the words weight loss in this conversation, not because I am promoting it. As a reminder, I am a weight neutral personal trainer and nutrition coach. But for purposes of this conversation, the words weight loss will be very lightly talked about. Again, not promoting it, just talked about it. So just know that that's there. Also, I will say, as with any of the more in-depth episodes that I do, like this one, this is assuming you don't have any underlying health issues. If you have health issues, if you have had a physician or a physical therapist or anybody who knows you and your body best, listen to them. This is for general information. I don't think that there's anything in here that's going to be harmful to anyone, but I feel like I need to say that. As I mentioned, this conversation is more from a physiological standpoint. So the fasting definition for purposes of this conversation is any kind of intentional withholding of food beyond our natural circadian rhythms. So I eat dinner around 6, and then I don't eat again until breakfast the next day. I think it's going to be fair for you to assume at this point in the conversation that I eat breakfast. And I will talk more about rhythms and all of that later. But so fasting is okay, well, I don't eat until 10 or 11, or I don't eat after 3 or 4 or something like that. So fasting is oh, even if I get hungry, I'm not eating then. That's kind of how I am defining this. This does not include, and I will not be addressing really today, spiritual fasting. Spiritual fasting is more of a discipline. It is done with an intention of growing closer to God, of spiritual growth, just deepening your relationship with God. It is also not a diet in disguise. So it is not okay, well, I'm going to give something up for Lent and I'm going to hope that I lose 10 pounds in the process or something like that. The heart behind it is getting closer to God. So I'm not going to really talk about that much today, but just know that when I'm talking about the physiological effects of fasting, I'm not really including the times that we are having spiritual fasting. And I will also say this, while spiritually fasting is biblically supported, it may not be right for you at this time. It can potentially guide you into disordered eating or worse. And so maybe fasting from something other than food is appropriate for you. This was something that one of my amazing experts talked about, and I so wish I could remember which one it was, but in season 21, when we went through the intuitive eating principles. And I want to be very clear that I am not saying don't spiritually fast. I am not saying that. I am not saying that. I am not saying that. I am saying let's reconsider intermittent fasting on an ongoing basis because of what it's doing to our body, particularly as women over 40 and beyond, especially and beyond. Let's talk about where I got my information, because what I am presenting to you today may be a bit controversial depending on who you listen to. If you listened to my little mini series on protein, you heard me give the example of choosing the voices that you tune into and the voices that you listen to. And so if you go into a crowded room and you have something really important that you need to talk about, you don't just go up to anyone who may be like saying words of the topic that you need to talk about. You go to someone you trust, who's someone who understands you, who someone can guide you, or they'll love you through it, or whatever you need. And you go to that person and you listen to their voice. And then you don't hear the other voices as much in the room because you're tuning into them. I have been very intentional about the voices I listen to. And so the primary source for this whole episode is Dr. Stacy Sims. Dr. Sims is an exercise physiologist and nutrition scientist who focuses on women's bodies and women's health and women's hormones as it relates to research done on women. And that is very key, which we will talk about here in a second. I have completed her Menopause 2.0 course, and then she also has a book out called Next Level that is an excellent resource as well. So she is the voice that I am listening to and trust, and that I am passing on the information from her. As I mentioned, when I talk about fasting, in this episode, what I'm really talking about is restricting the time that we eat outside of our natural circadian rhythm, of the natural, like, finish the day, stop eating, resume when you wake up. Like, that's kind of a more of a natural circadian rhythm. There are a lot of different types of fasting, which I am not going to get into because this is not a how to fast episode. This is quite the opposite. But there are a lot of different types, but the commonality between a lot of them is calorie restriction, because most of the time we are not getting enough calorie intake because it's a very tight window, whether you're eating in a short amount of time or a little bit longer or doing different days. Again, this is not a how to fast episode, but just know that that's kind of the commonality of it. Now, this is because the original research that was done on fasting was done in the 1930s. So if go back to history, if you're a history buff, you're going to love this. If you're not a history buff like me, just kind of rewind. And two main things were happening. One, in the 1930s was the Great Depression. We did not have the food resources that we have today. There was a shortage of food. Also, across the pond, there was a war going on. There was the potential that the United States would be joining this war, which, as we know, we did, and that turned into us joining, and it was World War II. So that's your history. That's all the history I'm going to talk about. What happened is scientists wanted to see, like, what would happen to people's healths, and when they say people's, they really meant men and young men, if they restricted their food intake for economic reasons and for availability reasons. So basically, what happens if we send these young men off to war and they don't have as much food as they are normally having? And so they started doing these experiments or this research with that in mind. Like, we don't have enough food in this country and we're getting ready to go off into war. What's going to happen? So this was the original research that was done. It did only include men. That was the general practice. Of course, they weren't thinking, and this was, nearly 100 years ago. So they weren't really thinking, oh, men and women are different. Like, no, women are just small men. No, they are not. They are not. And so they restricted the calories by about 20% for the young men that they were doing in the studies. So these were the findings in the original research. One thing is it increased the telomere length. So the telomere is, if you think about your chromosome, and that chromosome that's kind of part of your DNA and it crosses, it kind of looks like a twisty X. There are little caps on the end of each of those chromosomes. So there's like 4 little caps on each of the end. That is your telomere. And that protects the ends of the chromosomes from getting frayed or tangled, and it acts as a biological marker for aging. So the telomeres, which are protective, increased in this. Okay. The other thing it did is it increased autophagy. So autophagy is just your body's way of clearing out damaged cells in order to regenerate newer and healthier cells. The best example the best example I've heard about autophagy is like if you have a party every night at your house, like you're going to clean up, but you're not going to really be able to get fully deep cleaned until you don't have a party anymore, and then you can really like get under the tables or do the really deep cleaning. That's autophagy. By the way, if you have a party at your house every night, I'm really impressed because like I'm in bed by 9. But anyway, moving on. So increased autophagy. Okay, this is good because then we can regenerate those newer and healthier cells. More recent studies, not done in the 30s, but more recently, studies have shown improved insulin sensitivity, lower LDL. So LDL is kind of that bad cholesterol, lower triglyceride levels, better autophagy, and then lower levels of oxidative stress. Oxidative stress, by the way, there's not a quiz on this, but when they throw out these terms that you may not be super familiar with, then I want to define it. And just to be very clear, I went through and had to get the definition so I could explain it clearly to you. So this is not always rolling off my tongue. Anyway, oxidative stress is when your body has just too many free radicals, like damaging stuff floating around your system, and then not enough antioxidants to neutralize them. So we want to neutralize those. And then that imbalance of having too many free radicals, not enough antioxidants, can cause damage to your cells and tissues. So that's another piece of research that has come out. And then also participants scored better on memory tests. Also, more recently, people have used intermittent fasting or fasting as a way for weight loss. And again, like I said at the beginning, I am weight neutral. I believe that we can be healthy at any size. And if you have not yet listened to season 20, episode 16, I've gained perimenopause weight. Here's why I'm not trying to lose it. This will go into more depth. So again, I'm not a proponent of weight loss, but I'm saying that this is one reason why people have decided that they want to try and intermittent fast. And then the other thing that people have reported a lot lately is that it helps with that mental acuity or brain fog. So stopping here, you might be confused because you're thinking, Amy, why are you telling us all this? This is all good stuff, but here you are saying you don't recommend fasting. Because these studies, either if they were in the 1930s, were done on young men, or more recent ones are done on healthy, middle-aged, normal to what's considered obese, whatever that is, sedentary men and women, and male rats. There were no female rat studies done, and this is important because it doesn't take into consideration the different hormones that we have. Then, let me tell you this, when they did these studies, when they have finally done studies on fasting on women, let me tell you what happened when women got involved. Number one, there was no benefit for insulin sensitivity. In fact, women who had high blood sugar and they were kind of on the cusp of becoming diabetic, so maybe they were considered pre-diabetic, they actually saw a worsening in their insulin sensitivity and blood sugar. And then if you are in perimenopause or beyond, keep in mind that a reduction of estrogen also decreases your insulin sensitivity. So you're kind of getting a double whammy with that. If you focus on your cholesterol, and we all should be at some point, right? Like we should be looking at it in some capacity. There was an increase in HDL. So HDL is the good one. HDL is the cholesterol that we want high. So that's good. But there was no shift in LDL or triglycerides. So those did not lower like they did for the men. Unlike the men as well, there was minimal, if any, improvement in autophagy. So that cleaning of the house that our cells do, it doesn't happen to our cells. It happens to the guys, but not to us. Men saw decreased oxidative stress. Guess what women had? Yep, you're probably right. It increased. So oxidative stress, again, is just when you have too many free radicals, not enough antioxidants to neutralize them. And then when we have that imbalance, it causes damage to your cells and tissues. So when we fast, the research shows that our oxidative stress increases, causing damages to our cells and tissues. Another thing that happened with women is our thyroid function slowed down. And then, of course, when your thyroid function slows down, that will take your metabolism with it. You have probably heard some version of this, but as a woman, your body will fight to preserve energy when you start fasting, which means it is slowing down that metabolism. It also disrupted sleep architecture. Just as a side anecdotal note, this definitely happens to me. Every now and then I go to bed and I'm like, ooh, I'm a little hungry and I don't feel like eating. And so I don't. And sure enough, my Apple Watch will verify what I knew was going to happen when I went to bed a little hungry and was too lazy to do anything about it. And that was, I just didn't sleep as well. Like my deep sleep wasn't as good. I had a lot more awakenings. The sleep just doesn't, it's just not as good. Another thing that can happen is you will have an enhanced or increased sympathetic nervous system. So your sympathetic nervous system is that fight or flight state that we've heard of. There is definitely a time and a place for that. So we don't want to never be stressed. However, what can happen is our sympathetic nervous system just enhances, it increases. Dr. Sims calls this that tired but wired state. So it's like you're laying down, you're so tired, but you just can't go to sleep. I mean, we've all been there. I've been there as well, but that is what that enhanced sympathetic nervous system does. And it kind of has an inability to reduce the baseline cortisol. So if your cortisol levels are at a certain point and you are continually fasting, then your cortisol levels are going to be a bit higher. And here's the kicker. If you exercise, all of these effects are amplified. So it's even worse if you are exercising. And of course, we want to exercise. Now, one thing that I could not find any conversation about is this element of brain fog. I will say I have had a lot of conversations with friends recently about fasting. I mean, one of them was like, okay, I heard your protein episode. You're going to talk about fasting. Can you give me the sneak peek on that? And then I was just having a conversation this morning with a girlfriend, and she mentioned that she was doing it. And she was like, my brain fog feels so much better when I don't. I can't find any research talking about the impact of females and brain fog. Like I said, I have had several friends say they notice a difference with that. So I can't speak to that. I wish I could. I wish I could be like, okay, but this is what this article says, and I can't. I will tell you that I did intermittent fasting for probably 2 years. It happened to be around the same time that I was writing my first book, Your Worthy Body. I talk about it in my book, and it is my biggest regret in that book. I do regret talking about it because now I've had women come up to me and say, oh my goodness, I started fasting and now it's wonderful. And I wish I knew what I knew, but I didn't know. And now I don't know what to do with all of that, but that's a different conversation. And especially I wish I had known that so much of that research was done on men. But when I was doing it, I not once noticed the brain fog lifting. Not once did I think, oh my gosh, I can think so clearly, or I'm just humming along doing things. That if that's you, I don't know how to guide you in this beyond listen to your body and pay attention to the holistic aspects of your body. Like I said at the beginning, I just want to present this information and You need to do what's best for you and your body. But I can tell you that the research does not support fasting for women. As far as for men goes, I don't really know. I don't really know. I guess what I would say is pay attention to your hunger. Like, that's what I would do if I was talking to a man. If they're like, I'm hungry when I get up, then I would say, then eat. I have men in my life who are like, I'm not hungry when I get up, and I just keep my mouth shut. One of the things I talk a lot about is listen to your body. And so this is also why I don't train men and don't work with men, because I understand women's bodies a little bit more. Now, I am going to shift gears a little bit and talk about what happens when we have a fasted training. And what I mean by that is when you exercise on an empty stomach and you have not eaten anything. Number one is it will increase a catabolic state. A catabolic state is basically when we have a breakdown, particularly of muscles, to fuel our body. This impacts our muscle. So when we exercise on an empty stomach in a fasted state, we are impacting our muscle and we are breaking down our muscle. This is the opposite of what we want to do. If you tuned in to the little mini series that we had on protein, you have heard me talk about a lot about this, about preserving our muscle mass, especially as we get into that perimenopause phase and beyond, because our bodies are naturally going to start losing some muscles. And so it is our responsibility to preserve the muscle that we have. And we do that by consuming enough protein, and we do that by exercising. But when we exercise on an empty stomach, guess where your body's going to go for fuel? Yeah, your muscles. So you're really not helping the situation if you're going into any kind of movement session and you haven't eaten. One of the things I talked about in that protein series, and if you haven't listened to it, I would love for you to go back and listen to it, but we want to have grandma goals. What's your grandma goal? My grandma goal is to be able to get up and down off the floor easily. My grandma goal is to be able to carry, like I have a client who has 2 grandkids. They're like 4 and 1-ish, 2 and 5, something like that. And she will like carry one in the baby carrier and one on her hip upstairs. Like, that is a grandma goal. She is strong enough to be able to do that. My grandma goal is similar to that. And so we want to reframe what we want our future to look like, not to look great in a bikini, but to move in a way that will fulfill our functional goals for that next season. I don't want to fall and break a hip. Well, guess what? When we start to lose a lot of muscle mass, then we're not going to have the stability. So all of this coming into play of preserve your muscle and try and grow it as much as possible. And yes, I will be getting into that in future episodes. So make sure you stay tuned, hit the follow button, subscribe, whatever it is that you continue getting episodes, because I will be talking more about that. But going back to the fasted state, when we exercise in a fasted state, then that's not going to be helpful to our grandma goals and to preserving the muscle mass. Not only that, but we will also have reduced energy for whatever it is that we're doing, because food gives us energy. And if we don't have that energy, we're not going to be able to work as hard as we may want to. Is every exercise session going to be harder, faster, stronger, go, go, go? Absolutely not. However, it is in our best interest to fuel well so we can take that workout to whatever level that we want to do. So if you're working out on an empty stomach, then that's going to be less effective, and you're just not going to get out of it what you want to get out of it. The other thing that fasted training does is it will increase that cortisol drive. So what does that mean? So we are in that higher sympathetic fight or flight state, like I talked about earlier, which means you are in a higher stress point, which can lead to higher catabolic aspect. So you're breaking things down more because your body's more stressed out, which means you're going to start to lose that lean muscle mass. And then just rewind like 30 seconds and basically the same thing. Like we don't want to lose our muscle mass. One interesting thing about cortisol or it's interesting to me at least, is that it fluctuates throughout the day. We're going to have periods of higher and lower and all of that. So in women, it will peak about half an hour after waking. If you can have something about half an hour after you get up, that is just something small, even if you're not really ready for a full breakfast, but it just signals to your body and to your hypothalamus, which monitors and regulates a lot of this, that like, okay, we're ready. Like we've got some fuel, we're going. I will tell you that when I do this, I notice a significant decrease in my morning hot flashes. Morning time is when I seem to get a lot of hot flashes more. And so when I get something in my stomach, that helps mitigate those. And in fact, this is why just on my own, before I learned all this information, I stopped fasting, because I was like, oh, wait a minute. I actually feel a lot better when I eat something. And I'm not getting those hot flashes, and I'm not getting the swoob and all of that kind of stuff. Every morning before my kid would go off to school, I'd give him a hug and he was like, gosh, Mom, you're hot. And I'm like, yeah. And I don't get that hot anymore. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. What Dr. Sims recommends is about 150 calories, 10 to 15 grams of protein, 30 grams of carbs. Again, we don't need to get caught up in the numbers, but just eat something with a variety of food. Like eat something with some protein and some carbs and some fat. It doesn't have to be a ton, but that will help prevent these effects of training in a fasted state, because that will decrease that catabolic state. It will improve your glucose control, so your blood sugar. It will help stimulate that muscle protein synthesis that we talked about in the protein series, which muscle protein synthesis is just when your body is creating muscle. It will reduce the risk of having that low energy availability. Like, have you ever gone into a workout and you're like, oh my gosh, I have no energy for this? My first question would be, did you eat? Like, have you eaten? If you haven't eaten, then ding, 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 there's your answer. The other thing it does is it provides gut microbiome support. So when you are working out and you have a little bit of food and some fuel and energy circulating through your system, that's going to help your gut microbiome. Now, let's talk about getting the effects that were done on men and those positive effects without fasting, because those turn into negative effects for us. The answer is one word and will not surprise you, but the answer is exercise. When you exercise, you will get the same benefits of fasting that they showed in the studies on men as women. Specifically with your cardiovascular risk factors. So those are your LDLs and triglyceride levels, and increasing those HDLs. You can do all of that through exercising. You will have your improved glucose control from exercising, and it provides a greater what's called adaptive stress than the fasting. Adaptive stress is basically, I'm just going to use like your body's resilience. It's your body's ability to adapt and overcome stress stimuli, like when stressful things happen. So when stress happens, your body can do a lot of things. It can either like cower down and just give up, or it can have higher defense mechanisms and go into repair. So that's more of the resilience. So exercise teaches your body to adapt to stress more, because when we exercise, we are putting our body under stress. So that definitely makes sense. Now, what type of exercise? I will say any type of exercise is beneficial. I will never, ever, ever tell anyone not to do anything that they love. However, if you are looking for particular benefits, you will get those with HIIT training. And I'm going to talk about all of these in a future episode, but HIIT training, which is that high intensity interval training, SIT, which is called sprint interval training, sprint, not necessarily just running, but just like it's the exertion that you can do. Also strength training, not a surprise to hear me say that, I know, and then some endurance. So we'll talk more about those in a later episode, but exercising will give you those same benefits that we want, but without fasting and with fueling our bodies. We have not talked a lot in this episode about the other element of this, which is when our body is hungry, we need to provide it the energy it needs. And not only your body, but also your brain. Remember, your brain uses about 20% of the energy that you consume. And so your brain does need the fueling for it to function really well. That's the other element I haven't mentioned a lot in this episode, but I hope that it is almost more than obvious of like, eat when you are hungry. And if you want to hear a wonderful conversation on that, go back to the intuitive eating principle 2 that I did with Victoria Yates. It's called Honor Your Hunger with Victoria Yates. It came out July 2nd, 2024. And we talk more in depth about honoring your hunger and the importance of that. So that is a wonderful complement to this particular episode. Beyond honoring our hunger, when we move, we want to fuel for what we are doing and we want to recover well for it. I'll be honest, while strength training is probably the number one thing I would say that will be helpful from a movement perspective at our age, it is not my favorite thing to do. I do it because I think it will support the future Amy. I am being kind to my future self. Just like Kathy Lipp and I talked about last episode with food. I am wanting to be kind to my future self. Therefore, I strength train. Do I love it? Not really. I mean, there are some things that I like doing, but not all of it. But I certainly don't want to go in, do a strength training session, and have negative effects from it because I haven't fueled well before or after. Exercise will stress your body. This is a good thing and you will get benefits from it. However, we want to give it what it needs to do the exercise to get the benefits by fueling well. And I will also say this, after you exercise, try to get some more energy in. So we want to have some on the front end of exercising. And again, this is to get the same benefits that you have been hearing about with fasting. You're just getting that through exercising. But the way we do that is we have a little bit before we move, and then we do our thing. And then when we're done, we try to get a broader amount. Maybe that's more of a full meal where we're getting 20 to 40 grams of protein. Remember, 20 grams of protein is about the same size as the palm of your hand. So this isn't a ton, but get that, have some carbohydrates, have some healthy fats, and that will help your body recover well and not go into that catabolic state, not go into like, ooh, gosh, I don't have enough. And so I'm going to break down my muscle for fuel. If we stay in this depleted catabolic state post-exercise, then you're going to have a harder time adapting to training, meaning you're not going to get stronger. You're not going to see the endurance. You're not going to see the benefits because your body is never allowed to recover well because it hasn't been fueled well. If you stay in that state for 4 days, then your body will downturn your thyroid function, which means it's downturning the rate at which it burns energy. When things are downturned, then we're not going to get those same benefits that exercise offers, that we're doing the exercise in place of any kind of fasting. As we finish up, I will say this. I have spoken with a lot of people and they have said like, I've been fasting for years. It works great for me. I am not here, once again, to tell you what to do, but I did want to give you the science and the research behind why it may not be working for you as well as you think it does. And if you still want to argue with me, that's okay. My friend Tiffany and I were talking about this morning. She would argue with me, and that's okay. And Tiffany, if you're listening to me, I love you still, and we can agree to disagree on this. I am not here to tell you, the collective you, what to do, but I do want you to understand what is happening in your body when you fast. I will also say this. There is a highly valued, highly educated, smart advocate, like we'll just call it like a menopause advocate, who is a proponent of fasting. If you are confused and you're like, but she's telling me to fast and Amy's telling me not to fast, I don't know what to do. I guess what I would encourage you to do is to truly tune into how you feel if you are not eating within your body's natural circadian rhythm. God created our very smart bodies and very efficient bodies to provide feedback of what we need and when we need it. And if our body is saying, I need some energy because I have a headache or I'm tired or my stomach is grumbling, then I would encourage you to honor that. One of the 6 values of this show that I think I put out there maybe that episode was about 3 years ago. It's called the Graced Health Statement of Values. One of those values is discernment. So use your own discernment. How do you truly feel? Not how you want to feel, not how you've been told that you're going to feel, but how do you truly feel when you don't eat? And that honestly is what flipped the switch for me from saying, I don't think that this is working for me. I'm not feeling right. And I feel a lot better when I eat breakfast. And I'm going to say, I don't know that that'll ever change. One footnote that I would like to add to this episode is if you have men in your life who fast, because the research does seem to support it. However, is that conducive to their body's natural biological rhythms? And really, only they can do that. Like I said, I have a lot of conversations in this house about listening to your body, and I have been figuratively slapped on the hand of saying, Amy, you're telling me to do this, but you tell me to listen to my body. So I honestly, with regard to men in intermittent fasting, would I recommend it? No. Do I recommend that they listen to their body and eat when they're hungry? Yes. And beyond that, I kind of feel like I just need to put my hands up and take a step back. Like, I don't know. I just focus on women, you guys. So I am not the expert on men, but that is kind of where I stand with that. To sum things up, why don't I recommend intermittent fasting for women, perimenopause and beyond? Number 1, because the research done on women does not support it in practically any way. And number 2, it does not align with our body's rhythms of needing fuel and then our ability to respond to that by giving it. Hey, next week we have a great conversation with Dr. Maria Colon-Gonzalez on diabetes. So if you are digging some of these more nutritionally focused episodes, be sure to hit that follow button and come back next week and listen to that conversation. And I will, in the future, it will be a bit because I've got a lot of episodes stacked up, but I will be talking about those methods of working out and how you can integrate that into your unique body. So HIIT training, sit training, strength training, all of that kind of stuff. We will be talking more about that. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a graced day.